Inventory turnover. Maybe one of the most boring, yet clearly one of the most consequential subjects confronting all retailers today. Turnover is really the key indicator of how well merchandise is performing at retail. And one of the things that every retailer needs to understand about turnover is it doesn't show up on your P&L. Your accountant in accounting does not measure the element of time when they report back to you on how much money you're making. Now, turnover is how fast you sold merchandise, and that's what turnover is, and it's typically expressed as a ratio. For example, I got 3.2 turns last year. What does that really mean? Well, first of all, I don't really like ratios. Ratios are financial to me, and they're not retailing. So a retailing word that sounds a lot better is sell-through. Sell-through sounds like retailing. Sell-through is turnover, but on a much more short-term basis. In other words, what was my weekly sell-through? What was my monthly sell-through? But when turnover is expressed, it's generally expressed annualized. What were my turns last year? Now, turnover measurements can also be looked at as a week supply. For example, if you had 2 turns last year in your inventory, what does that mean? Well, it means that it would take you 26 weeks to sell the typical item in your store. That's how long merchandise stays on your floor. You have a 26-week supply. If you had 3 turns, it would be about 17 weeks. You simply take 52 weeks in a year and divide by your turn rate. Now let's talk a little bit about what that means, 2 turns in 26 weeks. Any merchandise that arrives in your store on January 2nd would be sold on the average around the 4th of July. That's a long time for merchandise to be sitting there. Now, typically that merchandise would have to be paid for. The bills would be due in 30 to 60 days, but you as a retailer wouldn't realize any cash back for 6 full months. So 2 turns is a very, very long time. That's why optimum turnover or achieving optimum turnover is so very important in terms of not only ensuring product freshness, but also plays a huge part in a retailer's cash flow. Speaking of cash flow, here's a really important metric that every retailer needs to understand. If you can improve your stock turnover by just 1 week over the course of the year, for example, if you were getting 2 turns, it takes you 26 weeks to replace your inventory. If you could improve that to 25 weeks, which is about a 2.1 turn, that would improve your cash flow by approximately 1% of your annual sales. Now that's based on a 55% cost of goods sold. What that means is if your shop does $1 million in business, that week represents $10,000 of product you are tying up money needlessly. If your shop did $2 million and you can improve your sell-through by just 2 weeks, that would free up $40,000 in cash. So clearly inventory is where all the money is in your store. Now, one of the things that we talk about is in retail, cheaper by the dozen. And I ask retailers, do you believe in cheaper by the dozen? And many times retailers aren't sure if they do believe that or not. And I tell them, you should, because cheaper by the dozen does work, but you have to run the numbers. If you run the numbers, and remember, 1% 1 week. For example, if a manufacturer is offering you a 10% discount to buy more product than you normally buy, but that extra buy includes 15 more weeks supply, that's probably not a good deal for you as a retailer. So cheaper by the dozen? Maybe, but if you run the numbers, what typically independent retailers find is that the extra amount of goods you have to buy to achieve the discount, that's quickly outweighed by the carrying costs of the inventory. What can I do as a retailer tomorrow to start improving my cash flow and turning my inventory more quickly? There are 3 things you can do immediately, and every retailer can start tomorrow, if not today. The first thing is you start planning your inventory based on months and weeks supply. That's sometimes called open to buy. It's certainly merchandise planning. But if you want to turn your stocks, let's say 4 times a year, then you really shouldn't buy more than what you can realistically sell in 3 months. If you start thinking about your inventory and your buy in terms of time, that's the very first start to helping your turnover. Number 2, you need to recognize old merchandise and take your markdowns. I call it take your medicine. One of the things I talk about markdowns is that markdowns are like tuition that you pay on the education of your customer. Pay your tuition. Move the merchandise. Don't let it sit there. It costs you money every day, week, month. Unsold product sits and collects dust. The third thing, be diligent and be disciplined about reordering. Don't sit with outs, because if you don't have it in stock, you can't turn it. If you don't have it in stock, you can't sell it. So understand merchandise planning, take your markdowns on a timely basis, and don't be out of stock of wanted key basic replenishable items, and you'll improve your turnover.